Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, the managing editor for Shadowproof, and it's really great to be joined by Brian Sonenstein, publishing editor for Shadowproof. We recently marked our fifth birthday, which means that we've been around 5 years, and we're getting this together. We're doing this segment to discuss some of what we've learned, reflect on maybe the way that media has shifted, but more importantly, to share some ideas and thoughts that we have about what we've been able to glean from managing Shadowproof over the last 5 years. The thought is that this could be a substantive and quick discussion that might be useful to others in independent media who are involved in this kind of work, especially people in the progressive or left media spectrum. And sure, some of what we discuss today, some of what we discuss in this interview or segment will seem like a commercial for Shadowproof. And certainly we do want you to donate and support our work. And we will encourage you to support us in multiple ways at the end of this segment. But I think that we're not just going to be puffing ourselves. We want to talk about some of what we've discovered. So to begin with you, Brian, you do a lot of the work on our freelancer and bringing them in, approving the pitches that come from freelancers. And so talk about what you've been able to learn from interacting with our freelance journalists who have become really a great community of collaborators with us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I think back to 5 years ago, even a little bit longer than that, when we first started talking about Shadowproof and how we wanted to do it. And, we obviously had a lot of positive visions for what we wanted to do, but we also spent a lot of time looking at the media landscape and being like, what sucks about being a journalist right now, especially an independent journalist, who is writing on the stories that you and I cover and the freelancers cover. And, a lot of the things that came up were things like not getting paid on time, having trouble finding places to put your work, having editors come in and sort of not work with you, but just sort of impose their will on your story and do whatever they want. And, maybe they don't run it for several weeks and you're just kind of out of the loop altogether. And so I think what I really appreciate about what we've been able to do is kind of to focus on all those little pieces that make the freelancing process, really a huge burden for a lot of writers, and do what we can with our resources that we have to try to help and to make a difference. So we over the years have worked to close the time gap between when we publish a piece and when we pay people. I cannot tell you how many journalists we work with that when we pay them on the day that we publish, it's like their minds are blown. It's just not something that they're used to experiencing, and it makes a huge difference. And also the degree to which we involve people in the editorial process, the way that we provide editorial assistance throughout the reporting, whether it's suggesting people for them to talk to, so on and so forth. Things that maybe staff writers enjoy a bit more in their relationship with editors potentially, but freelancers are generally not treated well. So, that's just one thing I wanted to raise. And Kevin, I don't know if there's anything from your experience as well working with and editing freelancers, but I have to say the thing I'm most proud of really is paying people on time, as sort of silly as that might sound to people who don't know. I think that is absolutely critical. It's fair. It's just. And I guess, just quickly, the last thing I'll say on that note is also not paying people arbitrarily based on the number of words that they use in a piece. I can see how some people might think that, oh, well, if there's not a standard rate, then how do you ensure pay equity and things like that? And I think it's actually tends to be because of the nature of journalism and the huge variety of work that goes into producing journalism. I actually think it tends to be the other way around. If you don't give people the opportunity to explain the work that they're doing and say how much it's worth to them, and you're just applying arbitrary numbers to the kind of piece it is or the amount of words that go into it, then you're creating a situation in which some people are going to do more work and get paid the same as people who are doing less work and putting less into it. So Those are the ways that we're experimenting that come to my mind, and I don't know if you want to add any of your own thoughts to that, Kev.
Well, we talked about this, and just very basically that if you're going by words, that doesn't necessarily value that piece, because what if the whole editing process becomes about trying to make sure you keep as many of your words in the piece? So an editor is in a situation where they are concerned, at least we would be concerned about removing entire sections from the piece, because we know that that's going to reduce substantially possibly what that journalist got paid for doing the work. So we value it based on the kind of labor that we believe is going into the work. We value it based on the time and the resources that a journalist is putting into every single piece. And there's no uniform number that we can say every journalist we've worked with has been paid. And I think that says that every piece is unique that we work with. And so, and that also represents the uniqueness of the people that we're working with. No one journalist who we work with is the same, whether we're talking about their identity and how they maybe self-identify, or whether we're talking about the politics and the experiences that they bring and the history and backgrounds that they have in journalism. Everyone is different. So we have varying degrees of expertise and involvement in journalism that we're working with. And I think what's nice about being Shadowproof is that we both have taken on the responsibility of working through pieces with people. And we'll have pieces that come that aren't very refined, but we'll take the time to make sure that they turn into top-notch, first-class reports for Shadowproof. So I think that's really important to get out there, so that everyone understands that we're actually defying professional journalism in the way that we work. We're embracing this idea that people who just perform the act could be participants and be part of the Shadowproof family.
Yeah, and another thing, I think those are great points about paying by word, and I think the other thing too, at least in my experience, is that it incentivizes things that are like not really in the reader's interest. Like if you're trying to hit a word count because you want to get paid, like you're not really paying too much attention to being wordy, or if you're including something that isn't really germane to the story. Like I think the quality of work can suffer if you're not paying people based on what they need and what they think is fair. Then it becomes about all this other crap, and you don't get, I think, good journalism. So I just wanted to add that in. I think your points are spot on, though. Absolutely.
So let's just confess right now that we didn't come up in the last 5 years with an incredible formula for running an independent media organization that is going to make it possible for any progressive or lefty media organization to become wealthy and join the halls of elites. You're not going to be able to suddenly use your media organizations to turn around and fund political campaigns that can compete with corporate Democrats. You're not suddenly going to have powerful lobbies that can influence Congress. And you're not going to be able to go turn around and buy mansions in the hills with the money that we're making from media. We did not crack the code and figure out how to do that. But what we did do is, I think between both of us, sacrifice a lot of our time, and we did dedicate ourselves, and we have accepted that it's going to take 5 to 7 years in order to perfect and get this right. And by and large, the timeline has mostly played out as you expected, Brian. I remember when we launched back in 2015, you said, this is something that as a startup will start to look the way we want after 5 years. And it's mostly gone according to that prediction. And for the time that we've been working, you continue to work your PR job. I continue to do other side things in order to bring in income. We've been reliant on spouses or partners' income in order to help us get by. And I think, people in our family owe a lot of credit for believing in what we could do with Shadowproof, oftentimes supporting us. My mom is a member of Shadowproof. And so it's people like that who have believed in what we've done. So in that sense, there's nothing really novel for us to share about Shadowproof. But at the same time, I do think that one thing that we have been able to do with Shadowproof is insist that we have standards that we don't throw away because we're having trouble coming up with funds. So for example, that would mean not having paywalls, not having article limits for people who are trying to access the pages, not having advertising. We did have advertising before this site spun off of Firedog Lake. Firedog Lake had advertising, but we don't have advertising. So I think that, you can add some more to this, but there were many points along the way that we could have sacrificed our principles and the way that we viewed Shadowproof, but we've maintained it. And sometimes that has meant making cuts and having to let go people who just weren't working out, or it had become a stress on the budget. But those were part of the growing pains of getting Shadowproof to where it is now, where we're very close to supporting the diversity of voices that we want to see supported in Shadowproof's work.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's this is something that you and I talk about all the time. It's something I think about all the time. I think there's this really intense tension between I think just because we have a media organization that exists within capitalism, there is this tension between having a business, and then there's this tension between doing the work. So like having the business is this, trying to organize things in a way that we are paying ourselves full-time salaries. We're able to support like a full sort of traditional editorial staff and staff writers and all of these things. And I'm not knocking that. I mean, I think that is obviously very important. And a lot of media organizations have set out to set that up from the onset. But I think for us, this wasn't a money-making scheme. Obviously, you and I were not doing this to make money, although, we should be making enough money to survive. Like you said, you and I have not taken a dime. We put a lot of our own money actually into starting up Shadowproof, and to a certain degree have reimbursed ourselves, but we haven't really taken any profit or made any income from it. And I have been okay with that because, on the one hand, we've been privileged enough to make that work, like you said, with the support of our spouses or, by working a dozen other jobs in addition to doing this. But I think the benefit and what I'm grateful for is that it has allowed us to put the onus on what we're producing. We're not making decisions because we have to keep an office or because we have to pay all these overhead expenses or maintain this arbitrary structure in order to make it like a real business or something like that. I'm just really grateful that we've focused on trying to figure out what the most we can do with the money that we have is in a way that's not like exploitative or extractive of the people who are working with us. So, we're not paying people the bare minimum that we can pay them to write for us so that we can sustain all of this overhead and pay ourselves and all of this crap. That was never part of the plan. It was never what we've really focused on. It's more being like, okay, how can we build up our memberships so that we have a recurring pool of funding that we can use to greenlight stories for journalists every month? Like that was always the goal. And I'm, as much of a struggle as it has been, I'm glad that we have put that forward.
Right. The goal is not to be the Lincoln Project of lefty media organizations.
Or the Intercept or any like big, we don't need flashy, I don't even give a shit if we have like 1 million readers a month. Like that would be nice. But like we're not chasing, sort of those markers of success that I think a lot of other publications do.
Why don't you get into something we've talked quite a bit about over the past years, which is not being a slave or not being beholden to the 24-hour or 48-hour news cycle, however you see it in your consumption of news media. because that's been crucial, I think, to Shadowproof's success, and recognizing very early on that we weren't going to be like the site that we spun off of, which was Firedog Lake, which did cover everything and tried to stay on top of anything that was capturing people's attention. We became very focused very early on the topics that we were covering and decided the news cycle was not going to drive Shadowproof.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Firedog Lake was a very instructive experience, I think, to this end. I think it becomes obvious after working in an environment like that, like chasing the news cycle puts you in competition with a lot of people who you just don't have the resources to compete with in terms of getting people to read or care about what you're doing. It also incentivizes focus, really like sort of a myopic focus on stories that really might not be like that important, or like it forces you to miss other things that are happening in the world because this is the story of the day. Everyone's reporting on this. And I think that also, as over the course of the last decade, probably even more, and I'm sure you would agree, Kevin, is that the news cycle has just gotten shorter and shorter. So it's more frenetic, like you're chasing these stories. And as that happens, I feel like we have less of a handle on the world around us as sort of consumers of news. Again, what I really loved about the way that we started this was that we were like, okay, no, we do not cover everything. We do not cover breaking news. We do not cover politics. Like, we have beats and we have things that we specialize in, and we have storylines that we return to over the years, over and over again. But we're not chasing the news cycle. If we get a story, or you and I have an analysis and we decide to write something weeks or months after the fact, it still matters. It's still relevant. It still has value. Just because we didn't get it in that 24 hours doesn't mean that it's not worth working on. And that has been really kind of like a mind fuck in a lot of ways, like coming from Firedog Lake. Like, there's this obsession over like monthly traffic and making sure you're always going up and that it's always consistent. And I think for us, it was more like, who cares if we write about whatever the fuck Trump said today, or who cares if our traffic is consistent, because we're not publishing consistently. We're publishing when we have good things to give people. And I actually think that people have come to expect that from us. They don't come to Shadowproof to find out what's happening that day. We are providing sort of a deeper analysis. We're taking the time to talk to the people who are impacted by these things. We're not just running off to whatever fucking expert at the university or whatever is going to opine on this. We try to find the people who are impacted. So those are some of my thoughts, and I'd be interested to hear what you think as well.
Well, I think that we, in our focus, have a pretty good combination that allows us to get to a lot of the root of corruption in the United States, because I bring this focus on whistleblowers to Shadowproof, and then you have the column on prisons, and you also have your podcast Beyond Prison that has focused very, very much on what those issues are. And I don't think that there are any outlets, comparably speaking, that decide to take those as their two focal points and see what kind of results come from just having those be what you cover on a daily basis. And then in between, we are able to fill in gaps by bringing on freelance journalists to cover these topics that we're just not equipped to cover. I think that one thing I want to say about media culture that relates to some of what we're saying on our focus is this admission that you're not the one to speak about certain topics. You're not the one to cover. The culture of blogging turned everyone into pseudo experts on what was happening, and everyone who is a citizen to some degree is an expert on these matters because they have a stake. They have a stake. Well, I think as a citizen, you have a stake. So if you think of blogging or citizen journalism as just an extension of your civic duty as a participant in the society and the communities in which you live, then it's fair to believe in the authenticity of what anybody is writing on their blog, because they do probably care. If they took the time to write 300 or 400 words and it comes out in a way that that grabs you, it has meaning. But there are also tons of people out there who are journalists who are trying to do this work every single day in ways that are more developed and more crucial than what we're doing. And to very passively say that, you know, we've covered something in labor, but ignore someone who's actually involved in regular labor journalism would be, I think, kind of insulting, if not obnoxious, to other people. To claim that we were covering climate change just because we, you know, pulled up a report here and there and noted that the heat was rising, then turn around and say that that's climate change coverage, would be an insult to people who are doggedly going around and looking at all the different details. It's the same way of like what I get frustrated and what you probably get frustrated is when you see these kind of like helicopter journalists who come in and cover a whistleblower story here or a prison scandal there, and then they claim to have like figured out what the system represents and how it works. And if you're not, you need people who are on a daily basis digging into these things in order to trust what they're saying, but also because, as you're saying, with the 24-hour news cycle, as you're saying, with it becoming more frantic and frenetic, if you're only if you're not relying on those people who have that experience, then you don't have the I mean, I'm going to sound like CNN here, but you don't have the fact-checking ability. Mm-hmm. You don't have, you don't have the bullshit detector that you need in order to pick up on what's news and what isn't news.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I'll you said something in the beginning there that I wanted to draw out a little bit too about the choice to cover, I guess most broadly, if I could describe what Shadowproof covers, we focus on dissent and we focus on sort of state violence, through whistleblowing and protest, through your column, and through policing and incarceration in my column. And obviously they overlap and they intersect constantly. They're intimately involved with each other. But it's interesting to me, doing this in these particular 5 years that we've been doing this from 2015 to 2020, it has really been an amazing barometer of the ascent of fascism in this country. I think to focus on, your column looking on the response to protest, the response to whistleblowing, and to see sort of how the sort of downward spiral of the carceral state and sort of the increasing brutality that's happening, outside of people's view. I think, again, in another 5 years, it's going to be interesting to look back on Shadowproof as sort of a body of work of the last decade, and kind of see what we've been able to track. And then the other thing I just wanted to quickly comment on from what you were saying is, I completely agree. And it's not even just the people who are digging into it every day, but also the people who keep the historical undercurrent of that beat present in what they're doing, right? Like when you have people like the folks at Vox or whatever who are just kind of like hopping on whatever it is and explaining it and then going on to whatever they're doing, or they have a hot take about it. Like history is always plays a role in that as kind of like second fiddle. It's not that important. But what I really value about our reporting is that we are cognizant, or we very consciously have a through line of American history on these subjects. And I think that is the context that is so sorely lacking in a lot of cases.
Yeah, those are some important points. Another aspect I want to bring out in our conversation is that I recognized pretty early that it was probably worth more of our time to spend less of what we do criticizing the corporate or establishment media and to recognize that we were building a platform and we could use it and make an impact. Certainly, I know I can count on my hand at least 3 or 4 stories, if not 5, that I would be able to immediately rise to the top, and people are looking to what I have to say, and I have that credibility. Same with you. There are stories that you've covered, and very specifically, I'm not just saying like in general you cover prisons, so everyone's looking to you. I mean, there are things that we've broken at Shadowproof where you've established yourself as an authority on what's happening. For example, like the gladiator fights in California, being able to break those videos, which was a very huge story for Shadowproof. As much as the whistleblower work gets noted, the work that you did publishing those videos was very crucial for Shadowproof. And we recognized early on that while a lot of sites that we share similarities because we are ideologically in line with them, we just decided that it wasn't worth it to spend so much time criticizing the media for being bad when we ourselves are capable of putting out the work that we think they should be doing. And in many respects, we've had epiphanies privately, which I don't have a problem saying that because other outlets are doing a poor job, we are able to benefit and do well because we fill in those gaps. And it actually is against our own interests to sit here and harass them and pester them into being better media outlets. If they want to be like that, that's their own business choice, so to speak. And they'll have to decide what happens later on. If that has some kind of effect on how they continue to exist in the media climate, then there might be an effect. I guess what I'm saying in a very wordy way is that there might be a day when they face a reckoning because they have failed to pay attention to certain stories, or they have not covered certain issues well, or they have spent so much time covering for power or representing the interests of elite politicians rather than allowing voices from grassroots insurgencies or grassroots communities to be given a space on their shows so that they can talk about what's going on the ground with poverty, with others who are struggling. And so we just do that. We don't need to show people why CNN or MSNBC isn't working, is failing us. We come in and, I admit it's limited in our impact, and hopefully we can grow and have more of an effect. But it's setting this standard of just saying, this is what we're able to do. And we don't need to waste all this time telling people why the media is shitty.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the benefits of not chasing the news cycle and trying to be like, the hot take that rises to the top of Twitter every day. I think it gives us the ability to sort of sit back and see where the gaps are. And yeah, I also think, I lost my train of thought a little bit.
Well, there. I mean, like a good example would be some of what has captured our attention over the last 4 to 5 years, and going to Shadowproof to see how it was covered. And instead of letting those media outlets drive or frame our reporting, we just come up with our own frame. Right. There was the Mueller report, which captured everybody's attention. But, for me, I was interested in what it was able to prove about the connection WikiLeaks had to Russia, which is that it wasn't able to prove anything.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
So there's the reporting, and it's not in the negative, it's in the positive. It's showing people something that you can take away from it. It's not saying that we don't think that there should be coverage of the Mueller report, but it's saying this is what we think is important about that Mueller report. The same would go for Democratic politics. It's not saying that we don't think that you should cover corporate Democrats, and it doesn't say that we shouldn't cover Bernie Sanders' campaign. It doesn't say that we shouldn't cover these Democrats who are running insurgent campaigns that have been successful in these past weeks, such as Jamal Bowman, who beat Elliot Engel or Corey Bush, who just defeated Lacey Clay. But it's saying that, like, let's get at it in a way that supports the grassroots activism that we champion at Shadowproof, so that we can see where those campaigns intersect and the way in which what those campaigns are doing are actually creating space for those groups to amplify I'd say accelerate their work and to benefit from the fact that they have representatives in Congress, or if we're talking even more locally, because we've seen some success in Seattle with socialist city council members being elected. So even on a more local level, I mean, here in Chicago, we've seen Democratic socialists elected into the Chicago City Council. So those aren't things to ignore just because we don't think the political system is responsive. But let's get down to what really matters out of it, instead of just having this kind of like facile report that doesn't really connect to our world. I mean, instead of poo-pooing it because we don't think it's something that we care about, let's find a way to acknowledge that it's a product of anger and discontent, and that there is a rationale for it that can be acceptable.
Yeah, no, and returning to your Mueller point too, I think you've done exactly that time and time again with Assange and Winner and Manning. You know, kind of seeing where people are completely missing the point, where there's a document or something that's been said that people who are just kind of like being assigned to the story and don't really have any connection to it, where it just completely goes over their head, or where their where their loyalties to the state or sort of the ideology of the state, take their reporting off the path. And it came back to me what I was going to say earlier about media criticism. Certainly we have occasionally done media criticism. I don't want to make it sound like we've never done it. I do completely agree that we have avoided just kind of like being annoyed with the media on the pages of Shadowproof all the time. But what I really like that we have done, that you specifically have done, Kevin, by yourself, and also, the things that you and I have done writing about the Marshall Project and things like that, is that I think we're very good at not just kind of like dunking on people, but documenting what certain operatives are saying at moments in time in ways that may not seem super important in that moment, but inevitably months or even a couple years down the line, I'm like so glad we have that in writing, that we documented it, because it ends up being relevant. It ends up being like, oh, this person who's risen to this rank, in the party or in this organization, don't forget that they went on CNN a few years ago and were saying this. Like, I think that sort of documentary role that we've played, whether it is having to do with media criticism or even more broadly, documenting things that may not seem critical in that moment, but end up being important down the road, is something that I'm very proud of our ability to do.
Yeah, a real example was back in January when Tom Perez, who was the DNC chair, appointed the 60 or more people to these Democratic National Committee platform committees. And these are the individuals who are going to set, to use their jargon, the tone for election year. And they're the gatekeepers. They're going to decide what we get to make issues out of and what we don't get to make issues out of. We had a thing when Jane Hampshire was running Fire Dog Lake, she talked about the veal pen, keeping the progressive groups and organizations inside the veal pen so that they don't cause too much trouble for the Democratic Party establishment. And those were the figures who were appointed. And I meticulously detailed who each of these people were. And at the time, I didn't make any predictions about what they would do. I had some ideas in the back of my head, but I just let it stand that these are their bios. This is who they're tied to. And that alone is reason for why they should be disqualified from being part of those committees. Jump to July, when they get a chance to vote on resolutions related to what the Democrats are going to stand for against Donald Trump and Republicans in 2020. And we see things like they're not going to back Medicare for all. They're going to actually go backward and be regressive on marijuana legalization because marijuana legalization was in the 2016 platform. And they're going to be for Israeli settlements in Palestinian occupied territories. And they're going to support all these other different measures that represent their corporate politics. And at that moment, when you see it breaking and people are outraged at them, we immediately go to the thread, share the thread with people, and they connect it. And we don't have to do that work. In real time, we don't have to do the work to tell people who these people are. That's already there. Mm-hmm. And so then people see the headlines about what they voted against and how they don't take a stand for politics that are in line with social justice. And they say, oh, all right. No. And I think when you see that over 6 months, you could have predicted this was coming, it makes you aware of how crucial the work that we're doing is, because what if you could have had some impact on replacing those people earlier so that you could have a better platform? Mm-hmm. Or what if that tells you just how much you need to not invest your time in that process anyways? I mean, I think it almost delegitimizes that process. So that's we got into the weeds with that a little bit, maybe more so than one, but I think it's a very concrete media example of what we can do. And so then, Brian, as we get close to wrapping up our conversation, I'd like you to jump in because you've gained a lot of very good, you have a reputation for covering the abolition work that is going on, this organizing, which is occurring in spaces around policing. It's also occurring in spaces around the carceral system or prison. And this has been something that, I'm not saying it's right place, right time, but because of what's happened in the country in response to the murder of George Floyd and how people are taking a harder look at the system, the justice system since June, you've been uniquely placed to lead some of those conversations, but not just, I'm not just saying like, okay, he's a white man that's stepping forward and saying I'm the authority, but like you've been uniquely placed to bring in your co-host Kim and also other voices in order to make sure people have a good understanding of what these discussions are about. And to talk about them in the positive, not just in the negative. We're not just trying to debunk what people are saying, but we're giving people something that they can say in response. And I think you should really emphasize some of this work because it's an example of what a small media outlet can do.
Yeah, no, thank you for those kind words, of course. I don't know. I mean, I have a lot of different thoughts. I mean, I'm probably just as surprised as anyone at the ascent of abolition, although in hindsight, it was decades, if not even just the last decade, but even going back further, decades of organizing and like really intense fighting to get where the abolition movement is today. So I don't want anybody to think that it kind of like came from nowhere or spontaneous. It's actually the fruit of like a lot of organizing labor, a lot of scholarship. But I think, for me, whether it's about prisons or whether it's about any of the movements that we cover, I find that, if you are really listening to and speaking with the people who are the most impacted by it, the people who are in the crosshairs. So in my situation, with my beat, that would be, talking to abolitionists who are in prison, talking to, and not just talking to, but building relationships with and really trying to, sort of amplify the thoughts and the expression of people who are in those crosshairs. I think, it's not, as sort of like depressing and horrible as these situations are, it's also where a lot of the world building is taking place. And I mean, that's what, really attracted me to abolition from the very beginning was, we're talking about, like I came to prisons through the work that we did at Fire Dog Lake. It seemed like whether we were working on whistleblowers or drug policy or anything like that, all roads led to prison, right? And I was like, always kind of dumbfounded by the role that prison could play in just destroying dissent and, maintaining the status quo, whether that's on sort of like the racial level of, we're talking about the disproportionate policing of Black and brown people, but also in terms of like sort of political opponents, right? And sort of ideological, cultural opponents. And I think what attracted me to it was, it's not this vision that you get with reform where it's kind of like, well, this is the world. This is the world you live in, and it's going to always be the world you live in, and the best we can do is kind of smooth the edges. It was like, no, this is a manifestation of all of our problems in this society and the way that they intersect with one another. And these are the tools that the state is using to enforce this order. And so what I find so hopeful about the rise of the abolition movement is that I think people are increasingly rejecting that status quo as just sort of being the way things are, as that the realm of possibilities that we might have thought about a decade ago, when we were working at Fire Dog Lake, has been completely destroyed. I feel like we live in a completely different milieu than we did 10 years ago. And so what I really love with the focus on abolition, what I'm really proud of that we've been able to do, is to insist that it doesn't have to be this way, that not doing something is not always good, and that actually the people who are impacted, the people who are the most impacted, are leading the way in formulating different ways of being in relationships with each other, different ways of dealing with harm and violence, and different ways of building like a healthy society and relationship. So I don't know if that was what you were asking me, Kevin, but it's certainly how I reacted to the question. And I'm really proud that Shadowproof has been, since the beginning, focused on this movement. And I think that I would encourage, it's not something that I want us to just own. Like, I'm not fiercely protective of it. I am begging other media outlets to take this seriously and not treat it like one side says this or one side says that, but like to really try to dig into this political project, because I think it will be enriching for so many other political projects around the environment and healthcare and, all of these things. So yeah, that's my takeaway.
Well, we said that part of Shadowproof is dissent, and I think a crucial aspect of our identity has been defying the Democratic Party and these elites that, all right, you know what? You're going to have to apologize to me for a second, because I have to go take this fish away from my cat.
Go take the fish away from the cat. I will try to carry on your point until you come back.
See here, like, as unintentional comic relief, I'll show you that we have this electronic fish, this thing that's incredible that, and this does nothing for anybody's understanding of media, but I have to like turn this off in the middle of this live broadcast. And then I can get back to what I was saying, and you can play with this if you want, but it won't make noise anymore. So back to the point at hand, which was that democratic politics, being a voter, is about lowering your expectations time and time again. And for us, we defy that by saying that you're not going to restrict what is up for discussion, and you're not also going to lower our sights. So we don't accept that you don't have the votes, so we can't have it, or we don't accept that you oppose it, so we can't have it. To be very specific, I don't honestly care how many days in the next year Joe Biden comes out and says he opposes Medicare for all, and it's a problem if he has people in his administration that support Medicare for all. We're going to ignore it and wake up the next day, and it'll be like Groundhog Day, where we ask him again, why don't you support Medicare for all? And that's going to be the way that it goes until he finally bends and breaks and people around him come around to what we need. And I think that's the thing about Shadowproof, is saying that you're not going to tell us that if we talk about these issues, it's going to elevate Republicans. It's going to elevate and make it possible for fascism to expand in this country. Quite the opposite. In our analysis, we see this as an alternative that gives space to people who are very angry legitimately, who are outraged, who are disgusted. And rather than seeing them direct their anger in places that it should not be directed, we say, these are things that we really have to deal with now urgently in order for us to prevent worse chaos, worse. If you want to be a think tanker, worse unrest, about obviously we think of things more personally in terms of human suffering and don't just think of like how power can manage itself so that it controls a population. As we end, I just want to bring up one thing that has peeved me time and time again as a journalist, and I hope to start a conversation. I'm not like, this isn't the end of the conversation. We'll really have to ask why so many people reflexively feel the need to respond to reporting that they see at Shadowproof or in other spaces with the reaction of, what do you expect? Or is that, are you surprised?
Why are you
I'm
surprised?
not surprised. Yeah. And this may not seem like a big deal. And overall, in terms of a lot of the things that we've discussed on this show, it isn't that big of an issue. But I do think that the reason it bothers me is we put a lot of time into what we're doing, and we find ways to make each story seem unique, and we find ways to convince people of the reason why they should care about it in this moment. When I do a story, my job is to convince you that is worth giving your attention in that moment. And so when I set it up, I have to bring you into the story and convince you that that's worth your time, and worth more of your time than whatever's trending on Twitter or whatever video you could be pulling up on YouTube. Or there's just so much in our culture that's competing for our attention. And then for someone to look at it and respond, I'm not surprised, or what did you expect, or did you really think that it was any different, or to say it's all too common, or this really happens all the time. I find that really obnoxious because it just doesn't allow for the conversations that we need to have, that I think we're trying to make possible through our work. I feel like it's a shutting down. On one hand, I empathize with that reaction. It's a reaction that we have a certain level of powerlessness, and there might not be any way for us to change these things. And to some degree, without going off on a tangent, we see what happens when people feel powerless and how they try to enact change in ways that are very limited and feel like they've actually changed the world in the process, but they haven't done all that much. And that's because there is this feeling of powerlessness against elites, especially during this pandemic, as everyone's feeling more and more squeezed. But I just ask you, if you don't have anything more to say, then I'm not surprised. Maybe you could just like, or you could share it, or you could find a way to challenge yourself to think more of like, why isn't it surprising to me? And maybe we dig into, like, in a substantive way, how it's very ugly that this has become the status quo, and it's been this way for so long. Because I feel like when someone says, I'm not surprised, it's kind of like, why did you take the time to put any effort into putting this out there? Because, if it's been this way all along, why should I care about it? And honestly, if you want to know why the news media sucks, it's because that's actually was the way that editors typically went about picking stories. In fact, there's a story in Cy Hirsch's book, which I have on my shelf here, in Chicago, where he told people about a shooting on the south side of Chicago, or told them about a police encounter. I think a black person died, and went to his editor and wanted to print a story about it. And they were like, that happens all the time, so we're not going to cover it.
Yeah. This really pisses me off too. And again, it might seem like a small thing to people, but for me, when you're asking what's the big deal, or this happens all the time, like it's one thing to acknowledge that something is not new and that it's a part of a pattern, that is important. But what you're doing by saying I'm not surprised or like big deal or whatever is that you are demanding everyone else's acceptance of that as just reality. And I think what we have consistently tried to do in the face of that is to reject these things. Uh, Methodical state violence against Black people happens all the time. I don't accept it. It's not something that I'm okay with because it's not surprising to me. I don't care if it's surprising to you. I'm rejecting it. That's why I'm writing these articles. That's why I'm doing this work, is because we are rejecting the status quo. We are rejecting the things that you don't find surprising anymore. That's the problem, is that you don't find it surprising. And we have got to maintain our indignation and our outrage at all of this violence and all of these things that happen, regardless of how normal they are. We cannot, we have to resist the normalization of all of these things. And that doesn't mean that we're naive and we act like, it's the first time or whatever, but we have to get out of this mode, speaking to what you were talking about with the way that editors traditionally think, like as readers, as consumers of information, we have got to get out of that thinking. It's so toxic. I think it plugs back into what you were saying about how, like, in a lot of ways, people have sort of become pundits on their own, and they're sort of filtering out like what they care about and what they don't care about. And everybody just kind of wants to be on the cutting edge of the new thing and the new piece of information that nobody else has and blah, blah, blah. And that stuff is just bullshit. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have any real bearing on reality. So I guess for me, by rejecting it, we're rejecting that as sort of a natural feature of our environment. And yeah, just stop coming to our fucking mentions and stuff and telling us you're not surprised. We don't care. Like, we're not doing this because we're trying to shock you and surprise you. We're trying to give you the information, particularly give movements and organizers and the people who would support them the information they need to do their work. I mean, that for me has always been a driving force. I guess this will be my final comment, on this and about Shadowproof, is that for me, I've always seen our role as movement journalists and working in this media space as disseminating this information, this organizing, sharing this information. We're not doing it to like a circus performance. It's not for your entertainment. This is just the same way that anyone would report on anything else in order to convey that knowledge and that information. We're doing that for social movements.
Yeah. And we need to wrap, but let's just be clear. I don't think that our members or any of our regular donors really fall into this bucket of people who are just dropping by to say, I'm not surprised.
For sure.
And let me just quickly extend this to something that has existed for the last 5 to 10, 15 years. And I'll be very quick because Brian has to get back to
I have to go back to one of my other jobs.
This is what it's like to be an independent journalist. We have to go back to our side hustles.
That's right.
Please understand, if we're focused on Donald Trump one day, it doesn't mean we forgot the record of President Barack Obama from 2008 to 2016. Doesn't mean that we don't remember what Bill Clinton did when he was president from 1992 to 2000. And if we focus on Barack Obama, or we talk about what Clinton did, or go even further back in history and talk about other Democratic presidents, doesn't mean we forgot what Donald Trump did, or what George W. Bush did, or what Ronald Reagan did. It's possible for us to still hold those things, but Donald Trump is president. And this is one gripe I've had in the era of Trump. He is the president. So we are allowed to focus our attention on him without having to include criticism of Barack Obama, because Barack Obama is not in the White House. He's out kite surfing with Richard Branson. And so we can also engage in substantive critiques of Trump and still hold reservations and still continue our critiques of the Democratic establishment's
and vice versa
ineffectiveness. Yeah, and vice versa. So as we end, you'll have a few things to say, and I'll let you play us out, so to speak, to wrap up the broadcast. But I first want to plug that there's a newsletter that you can subscribe to. It's over at Substack. It's dissenter.substack.com. And if you go there, you can get whistleblower stories that I'm covering on a weekly basis. There's free content, and then there will be exclusive content if you'd like to become a supporter. By becoming a supporter, you help us fund the journalism, especially from freelancers that we're doing at the website. And I think that's the most crucial thing to plug. And then I'll say thank you to all of the members who have been with us. We have about 120 of you. It's very, it's very humbling to me to know that there are people out there who will give to what we are doing. And it forces me to rededicate myself to this work every single day. There are dozens of people who gave when I traveled to London to cover Julian Assange's hearing. I may or may not make it back to London this year to cover further developments with Julian Assange's case. Regardless, knowing that there are people out there who are willing to give thousands of dollars collectively to make that journalism possible means a lot, because it is very expensive to travel across the world to cover what our government is doing to bring a journalist to the United States and put him on trial. So I end with that. And Brian, anything that you have for our members and donors before we close?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to echo that. Please check out Kevin's newsletter. Please stay tuned for his coming continuing reporting on Assange. I think that those are two places where you as a reader, if you're not a subscriber, if you're not a member or a donor, these are places where you can put small amounts of money and make a big difference. You're plugging holes in media coverage. You are actively paying for reporting that other people are not going to get because other people are not doing that work. And I guess the thing I want to end on is something, again, that you and I talk a lot about, Kevin. And I think what we are trying to do at Shadowproof, and what I want folks out there who are, again, not members or donors to really think about, is also shifting the way that we as readers think about consuming media. We want, like, Shadowproof has worked really hard to keep our reporting free to everybody. Like, we don't want to do paywalls. We don't want to restrict content or anything like that. We also understand that not everybody has money to give, particularly the people who are reading our reporting, because we're reporting on things that are relevant to people who often live in poverty and don't have money. I understand that. For those of you who are able to give $5, $10, $15 a month, we need to create a culture of giving like that in media. If we want to keep it free, if we want to keep it open to everyone, obviously in an ideal world, we would get all of our news for free. We wouldn't have to pay for it. And I also just think that, like, giving your money to just the New York Times because they have the biggest platform and the biggest impact, we're not doing our jobs to sort of approach the need in this space for free and open media and for dissenting perspectives as we could be doing. So this is all a long-winded way of saying that if you're somebody who has been sort of like hesitant about supporting an independent media organization, whether it's Shadowproof, whether it's Truthout, whether it's anyone, I want you to really meditate on that for a while, because it's not about like giving us money. Like I said, Kevin and I are not getting paid. Your money's not coming to us. Like, the money's going to go in the pockets of writers who are, for example, at Shadowproof right now, covering how abolitionists answer the question of what do we do about violence without cops in prisons. People have been asking this question all over the place. Nobody seems to really have a lot of answers that they're publishing at their outlets. We're doing that. If you give us $5 a month, you're helping make that happen. You're helping make it available to people who can't pay for it. And yeah, I just feel like, and if you're out there listening and you are a journalist or you're an editor and you work for one of these other publications, we all need to work on working with our readers. We need to work together on building sort of a new culture and a new understanding around the production of media, how we get it, how we should pay for it in ways that don't restrict anyone's access to it. I'm hoping in these next few years we can really challenge sort of the public approach to that. So if you're able to, again, even $5 a month, it doesn't seem like much, but with everybody else, you're able to pay a freelancer to report on something that no one else is reporting on that month. You can know that your $5, your cup of coffee is going towards that. Please consider doing it. And we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be celebrating our 5-year milestone without people out there. Like you said, 120 people or the thousands of people who give us one-time donations wouldn't be here without people believing that. And I just want to help that grow at a time when media is falling apart. People are losing their jobs in media. People are having to just exit journalism altogether. Local media is crumbling. Until we have a better funding mechanism that doesn't make it incumbent on you as an individual consumer to pay for it, we all need to chip in, even if it's just a couple dollars, to keep things going. So that's where I wanted to end it.
Right. So where do they go to donate to Shadowproof?
That would be shadowproof.com/donate.
And again, if you're not giving to us, at least give to another independent media organization.
Please.
We have friends at Truth Out who could use your support. We have people who do work in other organizations. And I think going forward, we aren't territorial, so we can encourage solidarity among these media organizations that do crucial work. So we'll end here. It's not the end of our conversation. We'll have more to discuss and talk about in the future. But for now, thank you all for supporting Shadowproof. And thank you for being part of our birthday celebration over the past week. And we'll be back soon with more content from Shadowproof.
Thank you. Have a great week.